So I think collaboration is really the cornerstone of research, right? Our goal, right, is to share this kind of knowledge that we accumulate. And so to be able to like share that process with other individuals and other individuals in other fields, like interdisciplinary work, I just think that's like such an important thing for research. And then for especially, I think, working at a smaller institution, right? Like building those connections between disciplines, I think that's just really important and can just really enrich in the research, right? Because something that I call attitudes, a political scientist would probably call like opinions. And so like that's this really fun thing to unpack from these different perspectives to really kind of build the strongest argument or kind of understanding what we're looking at. I kind of have kind of numerous research interests, but really they focus on looking at the causes and consequences of how people think about politically and socially relevant issues. So I think of my work falling into like the realm of like political and social cognition, and kind of two overlapping areas, communication complexity, and then looking at like political symmetry versus like asymmetry, or just kind of like looking at those two things. Like a lot of my work probably looks at is like attitude stuff more broadly. So I really look at like attitudes. And I kind of fell into the language research in my undergraduate degree, actually doing research, and kind of finding out like, hey, we can look at language and kind of pick it apart and we can like see these really cool patterns emerge. And so that was really where it first started. And then I kind of put that down for a little bit, and focused on like my attitude, kind of like political psychology research. And then when I went for my PhD programs, I did my master's and my PhD in two different institutions. So when I was looking for my PhD, I got kind of back into that language aspect of research and kind of what can we understand from what people are saying that might be different than what maybe they're explicitly telling us, or that might be a little bit more, I think of as like hidden. So essentially we're thinking of like language, like every time we communicate and speak, right, that's essentially representing our thoughts, right? Like, of course, people can not be 100% accurate, but we run that risk no matter what, right? Like with self-reports, stuff like that. But we hope that people, right, might have a harder time kind of lying or kind of masking what they're saying when they're just kind of like spouting off things. And so we think of that as representing what we consider like multidimensional versus unidimensional thinking. And so like the construct we use, linguistic complexity or integrative complexity, is like specifically designed to kind of understand like the structure of our language and how that represents this idea of like multidimensional thinking. So is it more multidimensional, which we would call complex, or is it more like unidimensional, which we would call like simple? Being like linguistically complex or simple doesn't equate to like good or bad. So like most people want to be like, I'm linguistically complex, but like that doesn't necessarily equate to good, because we can be like really complex and verbose and like confuse our audience and kind of over explain and not be really clear. Whereas if we're very simple, right, we can really get the message across very simply. In these different contexts of, entertainment and politics, we do see like certain patterns emerge. So like in the political field, there's this really interesting pattern that emerges where it looks like when politicians are like going up for re-election, there's this kind of dip in complexity right before election time. And is that necessarily good or bad? I don't know. It's just this kind of pattern that emerges. Maybe it's like the final push. You just get your like one message out there, vote for me. I don't know. Right. But it doesn't necessarily mean good or bad in the entertainment industry. The same kind of thing. It depends on the medium. So like movies versus music. But also we think of like, what are the goals of like movies? A lot of times it's kind of just been like pushing stuff out a little bit. And so there can be some maybe like trends and complexity maybe associating with quality inequality because it's this idea of like just getting that out to like the public. So there's kind of variations, but one doesn't necessarily equate to like good or bad or anything.